Hi, BookTube. Today I am coming at you with my wrap-up for the month of May. There is still one more day left in May. I'm filming this on May 30th, but I don't think I'm going to complete anything else in that day. So I've just decided to go ahead and film this now, and I will put it up at the beginning of June. I haven't been reading much lately, haven't felt like it, so like I said, I don't think I'll finish anything else. I did, however, read 9 books in the month of May, and I wanted to talk to you about them. 3 of those books were for maybe mid-rash, and I'm not going to go into any great detail with them, because I already went over those in a previous video, which I will try to remember to link down below. So I will just quickly name those 3 books, and I'm not going to go into any detail about them. So the 3 books that I read for maybe mid-rash were Standing in the Light, My Life as a Panthiest by Sharman Russell, The 95 Theses and Other Writings by Martin Luther, and Judas by Amos Oz. So those were my 3 maybe mid-rash books. Moving on now to some nonfiction books that I read. I read 3 nonfiction books in the month of May. One of those was Founding Brothers, The Revolutionary Generation by Joseph J. Ellis. And this follows 6 episodes in the lives of the Founding Brothers, Hamilton, Burr, Jefferson, Franklin, Washington, Adams, and Madison, that sort of shaped the course of our nation. So one of those was the duel between Hamilton and Burr. Another was Washington's president setting farewell address, so on and so forth. And so this was a fascinating look at how these various episodes or events shaped the course of the United States back in 1790. So I really enjoyed this. It was pretty short, so it didn't go into a whole lot of detail, but I still liked reading more about these various things that happened. Some of these I didn't know much about. I mean, of course I knew about the duel between Hamilton and Burr, but I didn't necessarily know, say, about Adams' administration and political partnership with his wife, or the debate about where to place the capital. Those things I was a bit less well versed on. So this was a good read. I recommend it if you are interested in the Founding Fathers, or in this case, Founding Brothers, and in the history of the United States. Another book I read in May that was nonfiction was Margaret Fuller, A New American Life, and this follows Margaret Fuller's life from the time she was born up until she died in a shipwreck, and it goes through her struggle as a woman who wanted to live a life of the mind as an intellectual, and not necessarily having an outlet to do so. Margaret Fuller was Thoreau's first editor. She was also a close friend of Ralph Waldo Emerson, and she did a lot of writing and editing work and contributing to various magazines and things of that nature. She also taught various schools, but never really found that work to be fulfilling because she wanted to do her own work. And so this just talks about all of those different areas of her life and how she struggled with this idea of living the life of the mind, but yet also being a woman, and that avenue not necessarily being available to her. I really enjoyed this. It's a fascinating portrait of Margaret Fuller, who was somebody I didn't know much about. And on top of that, learning more about, women's struggles at that time period and all of the ways they were sort of thwarted from living the life of the mind, or just, not being able to participate in various activities in society purely based on their gender. It's fascinating and irritating and maddening to read this and to see that we have come a long ways, but we still have a long ways to go. So, yes, really enjoyed this, and I'm glad I finally read it because it had been on my shelves for a long time. Another nonfiction book that had been on my shelves probably even longer than the Margaret Fuller book was The Civil Wars of Julia Ward Howe, a biography. Julia Ward Howe wrote now the name is escaping me, The Battle Hymn of the Republic. That is what she's most famous for, and similar to Margaret Fuller, she was also someone who wanted to be an intellectual and a writer, and yet was sort of stopped from doing that. She married Samuel Gridley Howe, who was a doctor, and they had a very rough relationship, to put it mildly. He wanted her to be the submissive, dutiful housewife raising the kids, and she wanted to have, her own writing career, and so that caused a lot of tension pretty much from day one. I'm not really sure why she ever married him in the first place, to be honest, because it was not a happy marriage ever, and so it was not a good match for either of them, and it seems like Julia Ward Howe really came into her own once Samuel Howe died, which is sad, but she became more into the suffrage movement, and then also did other things in terms of her writing after he passed away, because she was allowed to do those things when he wasn't around and wasn't there to try to stop her. So again, like the Margaret Fuller book, it just shows how women at that time period were thought to be nothing more than a glorified housekeeper or a child bearing caretaker, and how Julia Ward Howe and Margaret Fuller both tried to break those stereotypes and those chains. And actually, Julia Ward Howe and Margaret Fuller met each other briefly, and they didn't really like each other, actually. So that was interesting as I was reading these two, to see how their lives sort of intersected ever so briefly, but they didn't really get on with each other. So yeah, this was by Elaine Showalter. I don't think I mentioned that when I said the title of it. But yeah, this was a really good book. This was actually probably my favorite of the nonfiction books that I read this month. I just really liked it, and I enjoyed learning more about Julia Ward Howe, who, again, I didn't know much about. I honestly didn't even know that she had written the Battle Hymn of the Republic. So that was new to me, sadly. Anyway, so that was The Civil Wars of Julia Ward Howe, a biography. Highly recommend. Moving into the fantasy books I read this month, I read The Last Wish by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is the first of the books in the Witcher series. This is sort of a collection of, I don't really want to say short stories, but kind of each chapter is sort of its own story about the adventures of the Witcher. It's a prequel to what happens in the actual novels. There's another book after this one that is a collection of short stories, and then it goes into the actual novels that are what the TV show is based off of. I watched the TV show a while back, and I really liked it. I know a lot of people struggled with it for various reasons. A friend and I were just talking about this series last week because we were talking about TV shows, and I asked if she would watch The Witcher. And she said that they had watched a couple episodes of it, but she couldn't stand Henry Cavill as The Witcher, which he doesn't bother me. I mean, he is good looking, I'll give him that. But I enjoyed The Witcher series, TV series, for what it was. And I also liked the book. I think I'll like these better once I get into the novels. But this was an okay first read of this particular series. I want to get to the short stories hopefully this summer, and then move into the actual novels. I have so many series started that I haven't read yet. It's ridiculous. If you don't know with this book, it follows Geralt of Rivera, and he has magic powers, and he's the Witcher. And so he goes and takes on these various battles and fights various evils using his powers. And that's kind of what the show is based off of, too. Anyway, so that was The Last Wish, which is the sort of prequel, one of the prequel books to the series of The Witcher. And then the other fantasy book I read was the Dreamblood duology, the second book, which is The Shadowed Sun by N.K. Jemisin. I'm not going to go into much detail about The Shadowed Sun, since it is the second book in this trilogy, and I don't want to spoil anything. But basically, this duology focuses on the power of dreams, and there are people in this series or duology that can use dreams, and they can go inside a person's mind while they're dreaming and use those dreams to achieve various things. And there's also something called Dreamblood, and hence the title of the duology. Anyway, so that is sort of the crux of this book, is the use of Dreamblood and using people's dreams, especially to help them with matters like death and things like that. It's kind of hard to describe, but overall this was a good duology. I enjoyed it. N.K. Jemisin's The Broken Earth trilogy is still my favorite of hers by far, but this was fun, and I'm glad I finally got this checked off my list of books that I wanted to read, because I had read the first of this duology last year, and I never gone on to the second book, so I'm glad I finally picked it up in May. And then last but not least, I've been participating in the Trollope read-alongs, the Consorting with Only Trollops that Steve Donahue has been hosting. And his pick for May was The American Senator. And so I read this for that particular read-along. And this, despite what the title says, The American Senator is really just sort of a side character in this book. The more interesting, more entertaining character is Arabella Trefoil, and her exploits trying to find a man to marry, because her and her mother, they basically depend on the charity of their friends and acquaintances, because Arabella's father and her mother's husband is basically a wastrel. He doesn't, he's wasted all of their money. They don't really have a place to call their own. And so Arabella knows the only way she can get out of these circumstances is if she marries well. And so she is originally engaged to John Morton, who is a diplomat, but she's not super fond of him. And then she meets Lord Rufford, who is very, very wealthy. And there ensues this whole plot in her head to try to get him to marry her. And things go on from there. And like I said, the senator that's in this book, Mr. Gotobed, he is just a side character pretty much. His exploits aren't that interesting. He's actually really annoying because he always has commentary on what people are doing, or the American cities, or not the American cities, the English cities that they're in. And he's just obnoxious, and nobody likes him, Nobody wants him around. The people that he stays with, they find him annoying. And the main focus in this book is for really Arabella. It's not Mr. Gotobed, the senator. I enjoyed this Anthony Trollope novel. It still doesn't live up to The Way We Live Now, which is so far my favorite of the standalones, but it was definitely a good one. I liked it better than Mr. Scarborough's Family. And then in June, Steve has picked for the Anthony Trollope pick to be The Claverings. and I'm waiting for my physical copy to get here because I have a free copy on my Kindle, but I hate reading on my Kindle. So yeah, waiting for that copy to get here. I think it should be here probably on Monday, if not before. But yeah, I've been really enjoying participating in these Trollope read-alongs and reading more of Trollope. He'll actually probably be one of my most read authors this year if I continue with following Steve's read-alongs that he does every month of a different lonely Trollope. Anyway, that was the 9 books that I read in May. I have quite a few other books on the go at the moment. If you watched my previous video about my current weekend reads, you will have seen those. Hopefully I will get some of them finished. I'm hoping that I start to feel like reading again here soon. I don't know what's wrong with me. I just haven't felt like it. Part of it has to do with, the current state of the world with the coronavirus. Part of it is just me and this weird funk. I get like this sometimes where I just don't feel like reading, and it'll pass. But anyway, so hopefully I actually read something once June rolls around. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you've read any of these books in the comments down below. Please subscribe if you like my content, and I will talk to you again soon. Thanks, BookTube.